I'm Randy Lewis, and over the last 50 years we've been on a lot of prospecting adventures, and this is one of my most memorable, get that right in a minute, adventures that I went on. So I'm going to relate this adventure in detail so you can get the feeling of what I went through and what I felt. And with words, I'm going to paint pictures, and with pictures. And a lot of people have chased lots of stories over the years, but most of them turn out to be just stories. So if you have a person that has the first-hand information, then that would be the one you want to go with, because they're the ones that actually saw it, and they're relating the story to you. So be careful about your stories you chase, because things are expensive and you don't want to waste time and money. It was a cloudy, cool day on the morning of September 22nd, 1983. Dean Carlson, Dennis Shunn, my brother Mike, and I left the Wasatch Front headed for the high country. We were in two trucks. Dennis was driving his Chevy and Dean was driving his Dodge. We headed up to Heber. Then we went over Daniels Canyon past Strawberry Reservoir towards Fruitland. On the way past, as we went into the canyon headed towards Fruitland, there was an old, we called it the Pony Express station. Well, it wasn't really a Pony Express station, but it was a place that they had horses when they used to carry the mail from Provo to Vernal. So it was kind of a halfway point where they could rest and trade horses. Then we went into Duchesne, and we turned up to the left to head up towards Rock Creek, and right there on the corner was a little Indian restaurant that had the best fry bread that you'd ever want to taste. I can't remember the name of it, but I think it was called Navajo Taco, and it was really good, and it was made out of fry bread. We started east, and we started climbing up that little hill out of Duchesne, and that's where we had our first flat tire on the truck. The front right tire on Dean's truck went flat, and he had a couple of spares, so we changed the tire and continued on. We hadn't gone more than a block, and the tire on the truck went flat. This time it was on the right rear tire. And so we changed it, and we decided to get going again. Then the tire on Dean's horse trailer went flat. Dennis had a spare tire for that horse trailer, so we changed it and we went on. And about 5 miles later, we heard the awful hissing sound, and yes, Dennis's tire that we just put on was losing air. We stopped, unhooked the Dennis's horse trailer, and loaded up all the flat tires, and Dennis headed back to Duchesne to get them fixed. This made 4 flat tires. Dennis was gone quite a while, seemed forever, and when he came back he told us that he had a flat tire on his truck and he had to return to Duchesne and have it fixed. This made 5. We changed the tires on all the horse trailer and finally continued on our way. We made it about 5 more miles, and we had a flat tire on Dean's truck. This time it was on the left rear. We started talking to ourselves about maybe we shouldn't be going on this trip. Something's not right here, and maybe we ought to turn back. We were indeed paranoid now. Well, we decided to go on, and so we turned off and went onto the dirt road just after you left Mountain Home, and back in those days it was a washboard road like you wouldn't believe, and the trailer didn't even seem to touch the ground. The old weathered tires couldn't hold up. The cracks in the sidewalls looked like road maps. Yes, they went on the horse trailer tire again. There they went. So we got out and looked at the tire, and while we were standing there looking at that flat tire, the one on the other side went flat, and so we had two flat tires at the same time. And Dennis looked disgusted, walked back, unhooked his trailer, and headed back to town. This time he was going to buy 2 new tires. He was back in no time, and we had our new burst of energy, and we were ready to go prospecting. The trailer had 2 brand new tires, and we were going down the road. The washboard road had the trailer bouncing back and forth from side to side. Dean had a careful eye on the rearview mirror, and I was kept watching him, and then all of a sudden he said, "That looks like a board from the floor of the trailer." And he laid on the brakes. We weren't going that fast, luckily. Now what? The floor had fallen out of the trailer, and the horses were running on the road in the trailer. Dirt road. We were going slow. Luckily, the horses weren't hurt, just scared to death. We pulled the horses out of the trailer and just looked at the hole in the bottom of the horse trailer. All the boards in the floor were laying all over the road. Now what are we going to do? Dean said if we had some wire, we could wire it all back together, and so we looked on the side of the road, and the farmer had just replaced all the barbed wire on the fences that run parallel to the road there, and there was a coil of wire laying right there on the side of the road. And so it looked like they just rewired the fence. So we cut the wire into working lengths and started to weave the bottom of the trailer back together with fence wire. It didn't take too long, and now the sun was starting to set, and we finally rolled up to the Rock Creek trailhead where they were starting to put in the new Rock Creek Dam. It took us all day, from early in the morning till dusk, to get to Rock Creek trailhead with all the problems that we had during the day. And the sun was just going down. We laid our sleeping bags in the back of the pickup trucks, and the beds were hard. I don't know if you've ever slept in the back of a pickup truck but with no padding, but you can feel every little pebble underneath you or any dirt and dust because it wasn't soft. And so I laid there and tossed and turned most of the night, and I couldn't sleep, some because of the adventure of what we were going to go through the next morning, and the other reason was the bed was so dang hard you couldn't sleep anyway. There were 4 of us, my brother Mike, Dean Carlson, Dennis Shun, and me. Dean had borrowed a couple of horses for my brother and I. And when you borrow horses, you never know what kind of a horse you're going to get. Usually one that hasn't been ridden in years and just sitting there eating hay in the pasture, and the last thing he wants to do is to be ridden. We had 2 pack horses. Dean and Dennis both were pulling one behind them. So we got up at first light and started loading the horses up with gear. I hadn't ridden horses in the mountains. In fact, I hadn't ridden horses at all. They told me all I had to do was sit on there and everything would be fine and be okay. So Dean took his pack horse and went over and tied the rope on the post, and I had the door the window rolled down, and he tied it to that post and had the door open. And all of a sudden, the horse went nuts and decided it was going to get in the truck. So it reared up, went in with its head into the top of the cab of the truck, and shook for a second and then went down. His eyes rolled back into his head, and all you could see was whites. He went limp, and he didn't move. I thought he was dead. But all of a sudden, we just sat there and looked, and then all of a sudden his legs started flying in all different directions, and he was running, laying down, then stopped. His chest and his belly were puffing like he had run 10 miles. He scrambled back to his feet. We watched him for a minute, and he acted okay, so we saddled him up. I was watching Dennis saddle his horse, because I'd never saddled a horse, and I kind of did what he did, and after about 3 dumb questions I asked, it was clear I was just a greenhorn, and Dennis kind of grinned. Dennis got done. He came over to give me a helping hand on how to saddle this horse. The horse they had picked for me was doing a lot of dancing around while we were trying to saddle him. He didn't want to stand still. He just sit there and danced. Dean looked over and said, "Looks like we're going to have a rodeo." I looked at him kind of dumb look, and I wondered what that meant. Dennis was a ranger in the special forces and put his time in Korea when he was young, and was a retired sheriff out of Weber County. He retired kind of young because his patrol car got rear-ended while he was on a traffic stop, and he broke his back. And he was on pain pills. Up on the top of the mountain was kind of a road. We called it the old bullet mine. There had been a dozer up there years ago, and it was the paint mine. And I don't know how the story went in on that, and someday I'd like to know. But so anyway, that was one of the mines that was a Rhoades mine at one time, was up on top of there. The trail had a few log fences around it, and I could see the trail as it crossed a small creek and headed up into the trees. Well, it was time to mount up and ride. Dean let out, and then my brother, and then Dennis would bring up behind me. So it was my turn. I raised my foot up into the stirrup, and the horse decided he wanted to spin in circles. And I was bouncing around on one foot, going in circles, and finally I got enough weight in the stirrup that I was able to throw my other leg up over the saddle, and that's when all hell broke loose. Yes, it was a rodeo, except I wasn't a rodeo rider. The horse bucked and snorted, and in circles we went. The next thing I knew, I was airborne, headed for a big rock. Time stopped, and everything went into slow motion, and I could see the rock coming very slowly. And it was in slow motion, and I was headed for it. Luckily, I missed the rock, and I went over the top, and I was okay. The horse continued to buck and crow hop and snort until nothing was left on his back. Dean and Dennis got off their horses and tied them up and gathered all my stuff off the ground, and my brother never got off his horse. He just sat there with a big grin on his face, knowing that he got the best horse out of the two, and it could have been him. Dennis saddled up the horse and gave me back the reins and said, "Well, get on." And I said, "You know, this horse has got a lot of weight on it. Maybe I can just lead him and walk along in front, and I think that'll work out just fine." And I waited for an answer. I didn't get one. They both sit and looked at me. So I guess that's what that means, is I'm getting back on. So I started again. I put my foot in the stirrup again, and around we went again. This time I got my foot over quicker and proceeded to hold on. The horse did a couple of quick jumps and then quit. Believe it or not, he was walking up the trail. I was proud of myself. I was a real cowboy now. I'd rode a bucking horse. Not really. I was scared to death, and the horse knew it. Now this horse wanted to knock me out with his head. He kept throwing his head back, and Dean was watching and got off his horse and grabbed a small piece of rope and tied it to the breast strap and the other one to the up to the bridle, so that now he couldn't jerk his head back. He handed me a stick and said, if this horse gets out of hand, smack him right between the ears. I didn't think that was such a good idea. Why rile him up even more? So he acted up and I smacked him. And only took once. The horse turned into a well-mannered horse after that. And when he got tired, he was even better. Well, I'm not telling which direction we went because I probably really can't remember. But I will say I had never been there before, and I just heard from my granddad, Bill Mangum, about the area, and I always wanted to go there. The place had 4 lakes, 2 had fish in them, and 2 did not. And later I could call this place the Valley of God. We turned off the main trail and started heading up the creek bed, following old game trails and picking our way up through the canyon, mile after mile. I gripped the saddle real hard with my legs and knees so I could hold on the best I could. And I found out this was a bad idea. Pretty soon my legs ached, and then they went numb. Then they hurt so bad I wanted to die. I couldn't wait to get off this horse. But on the other hand, I didn't know what would happen if I tried to get back on the horse again, so I decided to just sit there. I wrestled with that all day on my mind of whether I wanted to get off that horse or not. My legs were killing me. Soon we were going across the side hill, and it was steep off the side, and I hated to look down. I don't like heights anyway, and I looked down and it went kind of straight down the side hill there, and it looked pretty scary. Then it happened. I was behind Dean's pack horse, and this is the same horse that knocked himself out on the side of the cab in the truck. Started to balk. He'd stop. And he would stop, and the rope would get tight, about pulled Dean off his horse. He didn't have the rope tied on, he was just holding it in his hand and had one wrapped around the saddle horn. Now I know why. The horse stopped again and turned facing downhill with its legs all bunched up together on the steep trail, facing down the hill. Then lost its balance and went head first down the hill. Dean let go of the rope and yelled, "Look out!" I guess he had to yell something. Look out was about as good as anything, I guess. All the weight was too much for the horse to hold back, and he went head over heels, then heels over head, and went tumbling down the steep hill, end over end, and bouncing. Every time he hit in the air, something would come off the horse. And I think he went down that hill about 150 yards straight down. Every time he bounced, stuff would come, pack saddles would be flying into the air, and dust was flying in the air. I never heard a horse scream before until then. What an ungodly noise that was. Well, that was just about did it for that horse. Nothing could have lived through all that. So we went about 100 yards until we found a level place on the mountain where we could tie our horses up, and so we could get off and go back and pick up all the pieces off the side hill. When I slid off the horse, my legs buckled. I couldn't stand up. My legs, they just were numb. Damnedest thing I'd ever felt. Couldn't even feel then. So I just sat there a minute. Dean was laughing his head off over looking at me. He says, "Wait a few minutes and the feeling will come back." And I bet. Pretty soon I could feel my legs starting to get real warm and hot, and I could feel the blood kind of pumping through them. Then they started to tingle, and all that hurt. Started at the top of my legs and then started to work its way down, and I just laid there helpless. I could hear some yelling from back down the hill, and other guys were working their way down the hill, picking up all of the stuff that was scattered all over the side hill from the pack horse. I couldn't walk, seemed like an hour. Dennis yelled, "Hey, this horse is still alive." He worked with him for a few minutes, and the horse got back up on its feet, and I heard him yell, "I'll lead him up the canyon and I'll meet you up at the top." And so the other guys were busy getting all the stuff and bringing it up to the trail and bringing it back over to the other horses. And so finally I was able to walk again. I worked my way back to where the horse had fallen and started helping carry all the stuff back up to the rest of the horses. Everything seemed to be all right, not much damage at all. By the time we got everything all packed up the hill and back over to the level spot, here comes Dennis with the stupid horse. He was okay, unbelievable. So we saddled him back up and continued on up the canyon. Darkness was starting to settle in, and so we were looking for a place in the wide place in the trail, in a little meadow where we could water the horses so that they would be tied up for the night. I remember the death-like quiet. Nothing even was stir, not even a leaf in the trees. Kind of an eerie feeling. I had noticed a change in the geology. The pink quartzite was fading away, and the rock was more reds and dark reds, showing more of a standing out of iron. I was looking for the black layer that I'd seen in the rock on my granddad's shelf above on the kitchen sink, and had black with white quartz and stringers of gold running through it, and the rock shined with rich butter-like gold, rotten with gold, the most beautiful rock you'd ever seen. We finally came to a clearing just like we wanted, and we tied the horses up. We got out our bedrolls and went in and let the horses graze for a while and got a belly full of water. After about an hour, it was time to tie them up. Dean grabbed my horse by the lead rope and snubbed it real close to the tree. I said, "Isn't that a little bit cruel, tying him up so short? You have no idea where we were going, and I didn't know how long it would take to get our destination. In fact, I really didn't know exactly what our destination was going to look like because I've never been there before. The sky was cloudy and the air was cold and the Quakies were thick. Then a strange feeling started to come over us, a strange darkness. Darkness started to settle in. The horses started to get real nervous. They started whinnying and making all kinds of strange grunting noises. My horse started to shake. I felt like I was sitting on a vibrator. The darkness closed in on us, and I looked at my watch, and it was only 5 p.m. We still had 2.5, 3 hours of daylight left, and then all of a sudden an empty, cold feeling came over us. From deep inside your gut, you could feel evil. It was a cold, nasty feeling. I could feel my horse shake and quiver. He was scared. I was scared. The horses stopped and wouldn't go any further. Dennis spurred his horse, and He was the lead horse, and the horse jumped forward and then went sideways, reared up, and turned around. My brother's horse reared up, threw his head back, hitting my brother in the face. My brother fell to the ground. He was knocked cold. We could not control the horses. They were rearing and whinnying and making all kinds of noise. We got off the horses and tied them up. Dean grabbed Mike's horse and tied him up. Then we went over to see how Mike was. By then he was starting to come around. His nose was bleeding a little bit, and we gathered around Mike, and he was laying on the ground, and as I remember, Dean said a prayer to drive away the evil, and as quickly as it came, it left. You could feel the darkness leave. The horses calmed down, and things were quiet. So we set up camp for the night right there, and we talked about the strange feeling that came over us, and we all had felt it. We got up early the next morning and had a small snack. I think I had a can of fruit cocktail. It's usually what I had for breakfast up there. My horse was really proven to be a good horse. We were crossing a small stream. Dennis' horse walked right through it. So I was not paying much attention. When we came to the stream, my horse hesitated, reared back, and jumped. I'll tell you what, 0 to 40 in less than a second, one click of your watch, I'm telling you, I thought the horse had stopped, popped my head off. I wasn't expecting that. Cleared the stream by about 10 feet, left my head back on the other side. I thought I had been shot out of a cannon. We started ascending up a small canyon. There on the right, there was the black formation that I'd been looking for. About 100 feet wide, running parallel with us on the right. We switched back to the north and started running into some large boulders. The trail was leading right through them. There wasn't much room to go between the rocks on that horse. All of a sudden I heard this crazy cracking noise. Dean's pack horse was throwing a fit again. He started kicking the boulders. Sparks were flying, and the stupid horse was bloodying up his leg and tore his shoe off on the back right leg. Now he was limping bad, and blood was running down everywhere down his leg, the stupid horse. We stopped the next meadow, and there was water, and we waded the horse out to wash him off. I let the reins down and let my horse eat the long grass while I was helping Dean wash the blood off the pack horse. I had tied the reins together in a knot on the end of the reins. That wasn't a good idea. I wasn't watching. He stepped through the middle of the reins and with his front foot, and then pulled his head up. Then he jerked his head up, and I heard the commotion. All the hell broke loose. He was jumping in the air, snorting and crow hopping, and I ran over and grabbed the reins, and he was pulling hard on them. Blood was running down his mouth onto his chin. So I grabbed my knife and cut the knot in the reins. It was too late. He was hurt pretty bad. Blood was running down the horse's mouth into his chin. Dean came over and slowly took the bridle out of his mouth and stuck it in the saddlebag. With his mouth would be sore for a while, he said. Dean tied a piece of rope from one side of the halter to the other and said, "We have reins again." He said, "Your horse will probably not need a bridle anymore. just lay the rope on the side of his neck, the side you want to turn. So I hopped on the horse to test out my new steering. I had power steering, and all I had to do was lay the rope on the side of the neck and then he'd turn. I hopped back on the horse to test out my new steering. I had power steering now. All I had to do was lay the horse on one side of his neck and he turned that way, and laid it on the other side and just give a little tug and he stopped. So I have power brakes, power steering, and air, and cruise control. Yeah. From a horse that bucked me off, now I can ride him with a halter. What a ride this was. What a ride. I fell back behind the others and started looking at everything, and I went in kind of a little world of my own. And on the left there was a small little meadow with a lot of long green grass in it, and so I decided to head into that little meadow and get off my horse and give my legs a rest. Then above me there become a pillar of light. And it started to descend. And the light got brighter and brighter until it came down and almost touched the ground. But when this light got so bright, I couldn't stand up anymore. My knees got really weak, and I just went down on my knees, and I couldn't move. And the light was so bright that I held my eyes really tight, and I stared down at the ground. But even that didn't even help, because I could still see the pillar of light in front of me, even with the looking at the ground with my eyes shut tight as I could. Like I still could see it in front of me. And then all of a sudden a feeling came over me, a warmth and a brightness that you can't really describe, the brightness. It was so bright you couldn't even open your eyes, and the heat and warmth that penetrated your whole body and made a feeling of peace came over me, and it's something that can't be described, a feeling of happiness, and you couldn't go anywhere. It was stopped by the brightness, and you just had to just sit there, and my mind went completely void of any thoughts. And it seemed like an hour. I was paralyzed in the light. You could feel the presence of a being more powerful than anything you could ever imagine. I was completely helpless. I didn't have the power to even stand, move, or couldn't even move my arms. And the bright white light, too bright to look at, brighter than the sun. I had my face down toward the ground, and I could still see in front of me. It was, even as I'm shut tight, it was a personage in the middle of the pillar, and a light of calmness came over, so wonderful. No words can really describe it. And I have no idea how long it lasted. Time stopped. Then I heard a voice inside my head called my name. Then it slowly started to fade away. The light started to become normal again. You could see. I noticed two small birds sitting in front of me in the bush, close to me. They did not fly away. I just looked at them. They were just sitting there looking back at me, and they were within an arm's reach away. They were sitting there. They didn't fly and they didn't act scared, and I slowly put my hand out towards one of them, and it didn't fly. And I put my index finger underneath by his legs, and he hopped up on my finger. So I brought him over close to me, and then I took my hand and I just kind of patted him on the head like this, and I talked to him for a minute, and then I reached back over and I set him on that branch, and he hopped up on the branch again. I put him back on the limb again, and then I put my finger out again, and I got the other one, the other bird that was sitting right by him, and I picked him up, put him on my finger, and I brought him over, and I did the exact same thing, patted him on the head, and then I took him and I set him back on the limb. And I turned around and I climbed on my horse and I started to ride away, and I turned around and had my camera and I took a picture of those two little birds. And I still have that picture of the two little birds. And then the two little birds got to pick up, and I thought there was something wrong with them, and then all of a sudden they turned around and they both flew off. So I rode down on the trail, back on the trail, and I'm headed back to catch up with the other guys, because I don't know how long I was gone, and I don't know where they were, and so I could see the trail kind of go around and turn up and go up the side of the hill there. So I thought, well, I'll cut across this meadow and make up some time, and I won't have to go all the way down and all the way back up. So I saw this little meadow, and I thought I'd just go across this meadow the other side and get back on the trail and catch up with the guys. And so I started to ride across this meadow, and there was all kinds of wildflowers. There was blue ones and pink ones and red ones, and there was a little stream coming down through the valley or the little meadow there, and the grass was green and pretty. Then I looked over by the creek, and there was a great big bull elk laying there by the side of the creek. And he was just looking at me like nothing was no big deal, and he was a monster. The horns were laying back past the end of his body. He had massive horns, just great big horns, and they went all the way back. Naturally, I just started heading towards the middle of the meadow, heading straight for the monster bull elk. And I had no idea. He was just laying there, he didn't move. And the closer I got, and the closer, I finally realized that I was in serious trouble here. He could get up, charge me and a horse, and someone was going to be hurt, and it'd probably be me. And it was too late to turn back, and I was only about 20 feet from that big bull. He just sat there sunning himself and didn't even pay attention to me, didn't even move, wasn't at all upset. And he was a beautiful bull, dark black, almost brown black neck, and horns went all the way past his butt. He looked like a living, moving giant tree. I was scared and stiff. I couldn't do much, just kind of try to guide him around guide the horse around the bull, but the horse and the bull didn't seem to matter. The horse wasn't scared of a bull elk, and the bull elk wasn't as scared of the horse, and so I just kind of stiffened up and looked straight ahead and just hoped that nothing happened, and I rode slowly right past that big bull elk, and I was probably, 4 or 5 feet from him. He was right there. I could almost reach out and touch him. And after I got through the meadow, I felt safe. I pictured those birds in my mind, and now this elk. And I thought, what turned these wild animals as tame as a lamb? I wonder. Well, I didn't get to wonder too long. I knew what had happened. These animals had been in the presence of that light, the bright light, and that personage in that light. And one thing I can mention right now that I forgot is, as long as Dennis was in this valley, he had no pain in his back from his injury. And as soon as he left the valley, the pain came back. That's just kind of a curious note there. Well, I joined up with the other guys, and just after I went through the meadow, I stopped and was waiting. They were waiting for me, and I continued up the small draw, and it crested at the top, and the view was spectacular. It was a large box canyon and scarred with glacier moraine area. Large boulders are strewn all over, and it was right at the top. The deer was about 10 feet away from the tree, and then Mike and the deer were playing peekaboo behind the tree, and it was the funniest thing you ever saw. Then pretty soon the deer moved up, and he was about 3 feet away from the tree, and Mike was going back and forth, and we didn't have cameras back in those days, and you had film in your camera, and you only got like 36 pictures, and if you took more than that, you were done. So not like today's world, so you had to be careful with your pictures. I forgot to take pictures anyway because it was such a fun thing to watch, and you don't usually watch a deer playing hide and seek behind a tree. We named this deer Dennis. After a while the deer got tired of playing and went back over and started eating in the meadow. He was only about 30-40 yards away over there in the meadow, and he just sat there and ate, and he would sit there all day. And then we'd call him and say, "Hey Dennis, where are you?" And he'd wander in closer. And I didn't get a picture of that either. My granddad always used to tell me, don't drink the water. He used to say, don't drink the water, and he'd tell me that all the time when he was telling me those stories. I never could figure out what that meant. My horse, Dean's horse, almost every horse that we ever took up there died. Mine died of some kind of cancer, and Dean's horse died, and Dennis's horse died. And I guess it's from drinking the water up, I don't know, one of those things. When we sat around the campfire at night, I told one of the stories that was told to me by my grandfather, and I told it just the way I remember it, time after time after time. So I added, don't drink the water. I took about 2 gallons of water with me when we were on this trip, and I have never drank the water up there. Call it what you want, but I just do what I'm told. Granddad Bill Mangum was the kind of guy that he was really, really quiet. And he didn't talk loud. He had a soft voice. And he didn't talk too much, but when he did talk, you better pay attention. It was important. He was the kind of the man that you always tried to please. You always tried to to make sure he wasn't upset at you, because you didn't want that look. You wanted the little grin. You didn't want the look. You got that little grin of approval. And he would tell you with nothing. He'd just grin. You could see it in his eyes when he was happy with you, and he wasn't, you didn't see it. I got to know a couple of Indians that were this way. Like Paul Tabby was a perfect example. When you talked, he would just nod his head in the direction or point his chin or grunt or something, but you didn't talk much either. Same with my granddad. I'm sure this is the way that Hassenbrook taught him. Hassenbrook having spent years with the Indians. I imagine he probably picked that up. So when your granddad looks you right in the eyes and says, don't drink the water, you pay attention. I could never get that through Dennis's head. He always drank the water up there. He's the only one. The valley was beautiful, and it had about 3 small streams running down through the meadows, all coming right out at the base of the mountain. All of them come out of the base of the mountain. There was a fish in some of the lakes, brookies, and some there were nothing. Yes, nothing. We looked around the valley and wondered which way to go. We decided to split up and meet back at camp at lunch. There were no radios back then, at least we didn't have any. It would have been nice to have radios, but we didn't have any. So my brother and I went south, and we circled the meadow, and I noticed a large pine tree that was cut down, and I walked over to it, and at the base of it there were 3 notches. And what was more unique about these notches is the blade that cut the tree was probably, you could see the axe marks were about 12 inches wide. See them, and that's usually not the way you do fire. We don't cut trees down to make firewood. There's plenty of wood laying around. You don't need to do that. So it's a mystery to see 30 trees chopped down and nothing there. I saw something that didn't look natural, so I walked over and looked at it, and it was a large horseshoe made of logs. It was about two logs high and about 8 feet long and about 8 feet wide, and halfway down there were smaller logs laying across it, closing it to make kind of a U shape. There was a pile of small rocks in the front on the horseshoe, just about up near the front there on the right hand side, small pile of rocks. In the middle of the rocks was an old stick that had been there. There wasn't much left of it, but you could see it did have a stick in it at one time, and it was pointed basically due north, so we figured it was probably a marker showing north. That's the best we could do at that time. Then we started circling the area and marker to see if we could find anything else. We photographed the monument and took compass readings off of it to see the degrees the monument was pointing. As we circled around a small grove of large pine trees, there was another marker just like that one, but it was facing a different direction, but they all looked the same, except this one was, had just different than the other one, but looked the same. Same size. There was no trees around it, and it was really old. The old was probably over 100 years old, made more from the size of the trees. This marker had a pile of rocks near the front of it on the left side instead of the right side. where the triangle formation, the rocks were kind of in a little they're in triangle formation, and the marker was crumbling at the touch, moving it, and it was careful not to disturb it. Now we had found two markers. There were old cans strewn around it, and they were newer cans. They were probably from the 1920s. They were badly rusted, and then there was the old evaporated milk cans and coffee cans, and then my favorite was the log cabin syrup can. I still have. It's shaped, looks just like a log cabin, and in the chimney coming out of the top, there was a little lid that unscrewed, and you'd punch a hole in that top of the lid, and that's where you poured the syrup out of your log cabin syrup can. Then we found a lid off a Postum bottle, and I know that was left by my granddad, Bill Mangum, because he drank Postum. And that was in that area, and he was in that area in about the late 1940s and the early 50s. We found the U-shaped monuments made out of logs. Started to go west, and then the small stream wound down towards the west, and it entered another little meadow, and we started along the bank. Something wasn't right. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something wasn't right in this meadow. I sat down and just looked. Then it struck me. The stream was running straight south, and it didn't follow the natural fall of the ground. It just went straight south. Then it made a 90-degree angle turn and went straight west. So the stream had been diverted, and in the middle of the meadow, and there was three big holes, big round holes dug about 20, 30 feet in diameter, and they were about 3 feet deep, and they were full of water. But why? What was going on? The stream diverted, and then the holes, and then why? Then all of a sudden, our hearts pumped with excitement. We had found a rich placer deposit, or a meadow lined with gold nuggets, something. We hightailed it back to camp to dig out our sleuth box. And when we got back to camp, Dean and Dennis were there, and so we'd found more than our horseshoe markers. They'd found a few more of those horseshoe markers at the other end of the valley. And then they found large boulders with a door hinge with leather hinges on it, so that it's kind of an old cabin built out of those big boulders. And they said if they opened up the door, the hinges would probably break and fall off. They were just about had it. We told them about the ditch where we found it, and we dug, and the large dugout holes, and their voices changed to a kind of an excitement pitch. And we fixed our lunch hurriedly and grabbed some shovels and sleuth box and headed back to the meadow. I think our feet didn't even touch the ground on the way back, because we were excited that we were going to go take that sleuth box in that meadow and dig out placer golden nuggets. That's basically what we thought we were going to do. And as we dug and filled the sleuth box, we went in layers so that we could find out what layer would have the best results. So we dug layers all the way down and took samples of each layer, and as we dug down to bedrock, and then we hit bedrock, we carefully scraped into the cracks and dig into as much as we could. And at that time, to tear down the sleuth box, it's that time. So we pulled the carpet out and rinsed it all out and put it in the gold pans, and each of us got a pan full, and there was 4 of us working gold pans. We washed and shook and shaked and washed and got to the bottom, and There it was. Nothing. Not a speck. Not a grain of black sand. Nothing. Just plain nothing. I was puzzled and puzzled. Then my puzzler was puzzled. Until my puzzler was sore. Hell, I'm still puzzled. Well, our spirits were pretty well beat down, and we put our tails between our legs and headed back to camp to sit down and together and try to sort things out. We made a beeline straight to camp, not following the stream up, and we walked back to where we came in the grove of pine trees, and the small ones about 10 inches in diameter. Then we noticed one cut down with an axe, and another and another, and we were cut down about 3 feet from the down. Trees were cut there in a group. Now what was going on? What was the purpose of all these cut down trees? Our mood changed and we were in the excited mode again, and the blood was pumping again. We started walking in the circles around these trees, looking at everything that we could find, trying to put pieces of the puzzle together to see what the clues were. That stillness in the air and the light gray haze started to set in, and the sun was going down, and the colors were starting to blend together and turn into that pretty gray blue color when the sun goes down and everything loses its color. And we make tracks back to camp and got some firewood gathered up to get dinner going before dark. So we set out to camp, and we all had a job to do, and there were no questions. We just knew what we had to do to get done. Breaking up the wood, pulling it up and piling it up for the night. I grabbed a roll of visqueen out of the saddlebag and started unrolling it. I had a piece about 30 by 20 feet and maybe bigger, I don't know, I don't remember. But now one of those Indian tricks my grandfather taught me. I grabbed a small acorn or a rock and put it in the corner and tied a piece of nylon cord around it. And that made a perfect grommet so you didn't tear your plastic. So you just use that rock bunched up in the corner of your plastic and tied a rope around it, and then threw the other end over a limb, and then you had the corners all done, and you had a visqueen shelter high above the camp to keep dry in case they had some rain. And everyone that has spent time in the Uintahs knows that you better be prepared for rain, or dug a trench around the tent or something. So I got it all done with do my part. The firewood was brought in and the fire started and dinner was just about cooked, and the outline of the mountains were slowly disappearing and the darkness was setting in. The light from the fire, well, I kicked the sleeping bag out of there, and I was laying on top of the sleeping bag, and then I saw a blue flash of light that lit up the side of the tent, and I didn't know what that was, and you could feel an electric charge in the air. It felt like you rubbed a balloon on your arm and held it up, and all your hair would stand up on your arm and your head, and your hair and everything would stick up, and you felt like you were in a electrical charge, and you could hear it sizzle and buzz and popping noise. I dragged my foot on the dirt, and I was looking at those flashes and trying to get a direction because you couldn't see where they were coming from. So I drew 4 lines in the dirt and made an arrow in the direction that was coming, and so we could look at it in the morning light. And it was an eerie sound, like a laboratory in a Frankenstein movie. It was scary. I thought for a minute that we'd be engulfed in blue flash of light. it just kind of buzzed and hummed, and you could hear it crackling. And it went about 40, 50 feet in the air and about 40 feet wide, and it wasn't like an electrical lightning strike. It filled the whole air full of a blue light. It was just a blue light that was just kind of humming on right in the air. And then it'd last 2 or 3 seconds, then go away, and then another one would do it. And there was not a cloud in the sky. The stars were still shining bright. After we all had that locations and everything like marked and lines on the ground, we felt there was nothing else we could do. So we just went back into the tents and laid on our sleeping bags again and drifted back to sleep. The next morning we all got up and early, and one thing on our minds, we needed to investigate the source of the night lights. We got out the compasses and wrote down all the numbers, and darned if they didn't match up with those horseshoe markers in the fields. They all lined up the same. And that was really interesting. Mike and I went north, and Dean and Dennis went east, and we had no idea what we were looking for. We walked straight to the mountain, and Mike said, "I don't think our feet were hitting the ground." And I didn't look things that way to me either, and usually we did, focused on the origin of the blue light. As we reached the base of the mountain, we could see a small plant life was burnt. I was glad that we hadn't decided to go over there at night, or we'd have been, looked like a piece of bacon over there by all them burnt shrubs. And now I can see why the Indians considered this place sacred and why there was a burial ground here. I couldn't see any mineralization on the Indian face on the mountain, and then you've got all the lightning and all the things that I'm sure the Indians had seen that before, because in fact we witnessed this blue light several times when we were up in that country, not just one time, and it was the same every time. Then I noticed something that wasn't natural in the talus rock. There was places in the talus rock that had been cleared away in lines. There was like 3 places that they'd moved all the rock and exposed the layers and moved all the talus out of the way looking for something, but it would have probably taken an army of men to move all that rock, because if you just looked up there, you wouldn't think anything. You'd probably thought it was all natural, and then you look at it closer and see all that rock was piled up on both sides, and all that rock had been moved. So we decided to go up on top of the mountain and look down to see if there's anything we could see up in that area. And so Mike and I crawled up through those ledges and went clear up on top of the mountain so we could look down in the valley. And we were sitting there looking and seeing how pretty it was. It was late in the afternoon, and so we didn't plan on being up there too long, but we were having, it was really a beautiful sight up there on top. And then we noticed something that kind of made us wake up and pay attention. There was a wall of clouds on the other side of the valley, clear over on the other side, and it was moving straight towards us it was moving pretty fast. So we decided we better get the heck off the top of that mountain and try and get back to camp. And Mike saw the same thing. We looked at each other and we just said, we've got to get, at the same time, we better get the hell out of here. So we seen, watching the clouds, they were right, that whole layer of cloud bank was headed right straight for us. So we climbed off the ledges and back down to the base of the mountain. Then it hit us. We were socked in, solid clouds, You couldn't see your hands in front of your face. Reality hit Rhoades between the eyes. Visions of us huddled, sheltered under a pine tree all night and not being able to see where to go. And the clouds were just cold, and it just went right through you and chilled you to the bones. What was a nice day of about in the 70s, close to 80s, turned into the low 40s in just a couple, about 10 minutes. How are we going to make it back to camp? We can't wait this out. We can't see. Mike and I stayed close together, and we kind of carried on a conversation so that we knew where each other were because we couldn't see each other. We decided to circle, and we felt like northwest to try and find a small stream. And we knew if we found the small stream, we could follow it down and get real close to camp because we're right next to it where we camped. So we figured we'd hear the horses if we came close. So the word of my grandpa echoed into my mind again. The stream comes out of the mountain and runs down through the valley. And there the Indian burial ground, and it is a sacred place to the Indians. And Paul Tabby used to tell me that the mountains were all sacred, and even the trees and the rocks were sacred. And we didn't always see eye to eye on things, but I think he was right. Then we circled around to the right, and then we circled the left, and I think we're just running in circles, I don't know. We finally found the stream, and we started to follow it down. Then here come the snow. Boy, it was coming down. There was about 6 inches of snow on the ground before you knew it. We were talking to ourselves, wandering down the stream, and when we heard Dean call us, "Where you guys been?" We've been here in camp, and we didn't even know which way to look, and we couldn't have gone to look for you anyway. We were socked in. Dean said he was worried about us, and there's no way he could look for us in the fog. We were all soaked and wet. Dennis spent an hour dragging in wood before the fog set in, and we sat under the bisqueen we built in a big fire to dry out. We spent the night talking about the events of the trip and laughed till late that night. The snow was really coming down now, and we had about 2 feet of snow piled up. The next morning, we broke camp, and it was raining, and we decided we'd better get the heck out of there. So we got out of there and went home. We had a lot of questions eating at us, and it wasn't long before we were making plans to go back. I really can't remember when we went back again, but it wasn't very long. This time we planned to do a lot more searching and hope we didn't get snowed in and out again. One note, my grandfather's map, who was shown by FW, were all the things. We never once looked for the X's on the map. Thinking back now, I wondered, why didn't we do that? It seems like all of these things come over you when you're up in there, and you get confused and you get sidetracked and you don't know where you're going, and you just get all mixed up, and that's exactly what happened. Over a couple of years, Dennis Shunn made several trips to the valley. The rest of us had to work, so we only get a window of opportunity, not very often, and Dennis was up there most every weekend. One occasion, Dennis's boys found a 25-35 rolling block rifle on the ground in the meadow, right where I used to tie up my horse. I must have stepped around it several times. This led us to look for all over the whole area there, and we found bullet casings everywhere. Behind the trees, behind the rocks, we found a pair of cowboy boots that were shrunk, sitting on a log, and they were shrunk up to about 5 or 6 inches long. There was definitely had been a shootout there. There was also 2 shallow graves. You might know how stories lead from one place to another, kind of like jumping from one rock to another, crossing a stream. This brings me to what Chunky Murray was telling me on the porch when we were filming Gibby's documentary, his Rhoades mine documentary, Golden Rhoades. He told me his father helped, he went with his father and they helped bury and clean up the mess up there. They burnt the cabin down, and the shooters that were there have happened from the shootout that happened that was by Mirror Lake. Now that was always the story because they didn't want the real location revealed. I've always argued that the shootout did not take place at Mirror Lake area, and now I have it confirmed by finding all that stuff up there. And also Chunky Murray told me that his grandfather and they went up and cleaned up the mess of the shootout. And FWC was there, and this is where the Rhoades Mines area is, right where we're at. We came across an area that looked someone brought in a track haul, and there was a small cabin nearby with dovetail corners, and we believed that to be a Spanish mine and a Spanish cabin by that big trench. And it was probably about 40 feet long and 20 feet wide and about 15 feet deep. It was an amazing hole in the middle of the high country. We went south about 3 miles to the edge of the valley, and a small canyon led into another small valley, and we heard rumors of a 4-foot gold pan near this area sitting on a rock in a small stream. There was a well-traveled trail heading for this place. While we were going down the trail, there was another trail that intersected this, leading to a small grove of quakies. I followed the trail in, and there was a pile of what looked like small little wooden kegs with metal bands around them, like little whiskey barrels, but they're about the size of a football. And I touched one, and it fell apart and crumbled right where it was, and all that was left was 2 metal rings. So I didn't have my camera with me, or I wished I could have took pictures of them, but I would assume they were black powder Spanish kegs that they used to carry black powder in. We searched for the gold pan and we didn't come across anything, but we did come across a tree that said 1856. I don't know how many trees are carved with the date 1856, but this one is hard to recognize from the picture. You almost have to stand right in front of it to see it. And also there was a tree of the dragon, which I've showed before, and I'll put that dragon picture on here again. And I'm wondering how many are up there. And also I think a tree with 1771 on it, but you know, people don't seem to like the trees because they don't think trees live that long. But I guess if you follow the trails of the Spaniards, of the snow is right on the mine tailings, and you can see exactly how they looked, because they're different, because they're covered with snow. And that's the way it was. And anyway, Dennis was diagnosed with cancer. We assume it was from the Agent Orange over in Korea that he had to crawl through in his military days. But he was getting desperate because he was trying to take care of his family, and he was trying to find enough gold to take care of his family before he died, and he knew his days were numbered. And he asked us if he could take a geologist up there. And we had always promised each other we'd never reveal the place and location to anybody. And I thought real hard about this request, and I talked to Dean, and we decided for Dennis, we would make an exception for him, and we'd give him permission to take his geologist up there one of the top geologists in the country and take him into the area and see if he could find anything. He spent probably 3 days up there with the geologist in the valley, and the geologist never found one shred of evidence of any gold or any silver or anything up there. And I saw Dennis, last time I saw Dennis alive, he was near a lake in the Uintahs. He had a rubber cork in his head that they used to put in injections into him for his treatments. And he had talked in at the hospital into letting him take one last trip into the valley. Dennis died in 1988. Dean Carlson died August 6, 2011. I'll leave this beautiful place with a picture from God's Valley. And this is the end. Copyright Randy Lewis, 1983.